Megan Doring. I'm the current treasurer for Space City. Thank you so much for coming and joining us tonight. I'm here to introduce Susan Jones. She's a third-generation Pacific Northwesterner and a real staple of the Seattle architecture scene. Her steadfast dissatisfaction with the status quo led Susan to getting together with some like-minded friends, Grant and Michael and Peter, some 30 years ago, to found Space City, an organization created to bring new design ideas and discussion to Seattle. These discussions and debates percolated and spread and helped make possible the iconic Seattle landmark that we are sitting in right now. The same dissatisfaction led Susan, dissatisfaction and unique branded of optimism, led Susan to mass timber nearly 15 years ago. And in short order, she became a national leader, helping rewrite the codes and drive innovation and spread new ways of thinking in the practice of architecture that continue to ripple outwards. Light on Wood is part monograph and part memoir, tying architecture practice back into the forests and the people and the stories that drive it. So please help me give a hand in welcoming Susan Jones.
And it's a huge honor to be here tonight. With Space.City, it's come full circle. Megan acknowledged that Grant Gustafson, myself, Peter and Mark Anderson from California now, started Space.City some many years ago, and we thought it was just going to be a small nonprofit arts organization, and it's turned out to be a really thriving arts organization for the Seattle community, funded by amazing grant sponsors and also people in this audience. And so deepest gratitude for the generations of leadership that this organization has represented. I've had the privilege of probably mentoring 5 or 6 generations, and I mean like 3 or 4 people at a time. Now, Megan as treasurer, but I'm looking at lots of faces in the room who were part of that story of how we got here in the Seattle Central Library, designed by Rem Koolhaas, OMA architects. And just that dialogue that we've continued to have has been really extraordinary. I also really have to thank my office, and I will say my offices, because I've had a lot of folks, and some of whom are also in this room, but particularly Matt Catro, our editor and kind of visionary behind Light on Wood, the book that's there for sale at Peter Miller Bookshop's place there, Megan Doring, and Ian Maples, and Maya, who was recently with us, who's also in the audience. Yeah. But there's been a lot of people, and they're all acknowledged at the back of the book, and it's been an extraordinary 23 years as a practitioner in this firm. And finally, my husband, who's sitting in the dark up there, don't let anybody see him, talk to him. His name is Marco, and I'm in love with him, and he's great. So, the book is dedicated to him and my 2 kids. So without further ado, I'm going to just want to talk about our work with Light on Wood and introduce our firm. And thank you all for coming, and come on in. Line to find your seats. There's plenty of them. They're good. Really grateful to see you all, so many old friends in the room, and hopefully new friends. Now, one thing I didn't do was to practice how to go this advance. Okay, great. So we have a small practice here in Seattle. I founded it in 2003. These are some images of our office retreats. I don't think I need to really introduce you all to my office. atelierjones is known quite widely. We've been speaking around the world in many, many occasions over the last couple of years especially, but it's always fun to show these images when you're in El Paso, or Brazil, or Belém, or Rio, or Venice. And it's these really speak of the Northwest from our work, our relationship from nature to the city. Our practice has a very traditional bent to it in some ways, and a very atraditional bent to it. The top line is kind of the design and build that Space.City lectures often dwell within, the world of making architecture, making form, making buildings that inspire us all as individuals and as people to become better people, to create better communities, and to be the best of ourselves. But the bottom line is a little more odd, and it's called, we call it research and policy, and it really begins at an investigation about a material, which I am very committed to as we go forward. This story of my practice, beyond atelierjones, some 40 years, I have to say, ever since I was a draftsperson in a small architecture firm in Bellingham, Washington, for a one-man firm named Sid Nesbitt, to whom I'm very indebted to. He was a Cal Poly grad. Thank you, Matt. And I got my first job with him, but this is a story of those 40 years. And it entwines both memoir, it's a bit of an anecdote to the sometimes black cape of the mantle of scrutability that hides these lectures somehow, sometimes with our practices that we pretend it just kind of, as Frank Lloyd Wright used to say, shake out of our sleeve. We know it's not that. Practicing architects know buildings don't shake out of our sleeves. They come with incredibly hard and dedicated work and ups and downs and twists and turns, whether you're Wright or whether you're Jones. So the book is a bit of an anecdote to that narrative and challenges that to some extent. But I'm going to get into the moments about mass timber, because I think that's when our, Megan called it dissatisfaction, but with this brand of optimism. What did you say, Megan? It was very sweet. I do believe that it's a deep optimism about the future of our profession and how we can contribute to some of the well-known challenges that we all face, namely climate change. And when you're emerging into the world of practicing architect for your own firm in your mid-40s, and you say, how can I make impact that's not just building as usual? Then the question, I think, becomes, well, how do you do that? And how do you take that seriously? And how do you really not mess with the data and create some beautiful anecdotes to the business as usual of doing? So for me, I would gone back to my Fulbright in '94, where I met Marco in Berlin, where I had the opportunity, some of the best 6 months of my life, to live with Marco and also read and translate almost inscrutable 19th century German written by Karl Bartescher in the 1840s. And he wrote about this concept of tectonics, a tecton, but he also wrote about the idea of Kernform and Kunstform. And this has crystallized in very odd ways in my career throughout my work, and it really crystallized particularly around this concept of mass timber, the blank, as Jennifer Bonner will talk about it, as the panel, this very blunt, silly object that is massive, 8 feet wide by 40 feet long and 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 inches thick. It's a very blunt object, and yet how can we make beautiful architecture out of it? That became the challenge of our work over the last decade and a half. I think in context of this image by Loger, which was part of all of our educations, hopefully, certainly part of mine at the GSD, dwelled in again and again and again. This primitive idea of how architecture arises from the Godhead, created out of the growing whole trees, and then pruned carefully to create a primitive hut, and this iconic structure which resonates through Western civilization in very powerful ways. But the idea of a material giving form to a culture and giving form to buildings really then became resonant again in a very different way in the early 20th century with the image on the right, with Corbusier thinking about his glee and his joy about inverse and architecture or revolution. He was also a dissatisfied optimist, I hope. I'm sure he was an optimist, thinking about the power of space and beauty that you could make from, yes, industrialized concrete through precast concrete and rebar. And when you continue that into my education, at the same time I was being presented with images like the last two we saw, we had one small element at the GSD to make out of wood, and that was the image on the left here. 4 years later, as I finished my master's there, I'm actually dubbed the woodshop maiden in the office, in the school, very foretelling the future, as I'm making a wooden model that's on the far right, which is a bridge over the River Danube in Vienna. And the bridge, of course, is made out of stone, steel, and a little bit of concrete to secure things. Every single project I did at the GSD, it was assumed I would be working in steel and concrete. We would be working. There was no question about wood. Wood was for the primitives out on the West Coast, maybe. And I myself laughed at the stick frame hut that we had to do at the University of Washington when I came back to teach there some 10 years later. It was just a given that we were working with this. So when you begin to jump forward now into 2014, and you're looking at Corbusier's, you're recalling the domino house of 1914, and then the work that the Architectural Association did with Hanif Kara, the structural engineer, to say, what if the domino house was reconceived as a wood pavilion? And this was actually built at the Venice Biennale in 2014, out in the garden, Marina Ressa, where you begin to see the same relationships of form and structure of space that is possible by these vast expanses of structural strength from these wood CLT panels. And you begin to see our architectural history through a different lens, and how does this material impact our form and space. This tectonic theme goes back to the days of the Parthenon. These are the drawings from Edward Dodwell in 1819, as the Germans and the English were beginning to discover the stone temples of the Greeks. And you begin to notice the little dentils that are there on the edges that reflect the wooden origins of these temples, none of which are extant now, but the ornamentation are remnants of these wooden temples. And again, in Baltichur, the way a flowing material out of water, a gutter for a stone temple, can be made out of stone. How does the material reflect the space and the form that we're working with? And that is not just an idea that's reflected in Western culture, of course. This is the beautiful Coast Shalish plank house, some drawings and images that were produced in the 19th century, and this incredibly exquisite detail here with the cedar bark that's torn, pulled gently from the cedar tree, wrapped around the cedar plank, which has been harvested from the cedar tree, and created a structure for the longhouses that dotted all of the West Coast for millennium until we came. This idea of bringing materiality and wood together. So when we were confronted as I was in this particular picture of the Bellevue First Congregational Church, this is from 2015, with the construction of these blanks, these massive panels, 8 foot wide, again, 6 inches deep, 40 feet long, not out of tilt-up concrete, not out of anything that was poured. It was 3 laminated pieces of wood that were laminated together and delivered with a couple of prefabricated cutouts. What do you do with them? How do you make form? And how do you make material? And how do you make spaces that reflect that strange and new, wonderful material? I really believe this is the next wave of materiality, bio-based materiality, that has been in this country since maybe the development of aluminum or steel and concrete of the early 20th century. So early on in my practice, before I really knew any of all that context directly, I had the opportunity to build a house for my family in Madison Park. We had bought the lot many, many, many years ago, saved a lot more money, saved more money, and finally had the chance to build a very, what we as hoped was a modest house of $750,000 on a small lot, which was tiny, about 2,500 square feet. And the opportunity to begin to shape what this privilege was, to build a house for yourself as an architect. It's a dream of every architect. It's almost a cliche, oh, it must be your dream house. That was the last thing I really wanted to do, really, but to shape instead the privilege of being able to do that for the greatest amount of impact, giving, openness, and sharing that is possible in a project. And I didn't know where that was going to start from and where that was going to happen, but we had the opportunity to Actually, it was just a gift. It was a gift from some friends of mine from Austria, where I had worked for a couple of years for a professor of mine, Boris Podreka. And this catalog comes over the seas. It lands on my lap in 2010. And I'm opening this catalog, and I'm looking, what is the ceiling of these beautiful, small, single-family houses in Austria? And it turns out, after a lot of work, I think it was Brian Garrick, who might be here, I'm not sure, who identified it with Mike Eliason, that this was actually CLT. And this was in 2010 or 11. I knew nothing about this material. Then I find out it's been used in Europe for some 20 or 30 years at that point. And I say, let's make a CLT house, which sounds kind of normal right now because there's so many under construction. But when we finished the house and the next church and the next two schools, these were some of the first 4 structures in the entire United States when we finished that work in 2016 and 17. So I'll just go through these prototypes very quickly. They were very experimental. I didn't know much about CLT at the time. I taught one incredible studio at the University of Washington. Deep thanks to the faculty there, the students there. You're all credited in the books. I began a series of making models, trying to understand this god-awful triangular lot. No architect wants to be faced with an isosceles triangle. Please run from that. That was not the point of buying that lot, nor was the form making of that. But it was an extraordinary thing that did actually lead to some interesting volumetric expressions that I was able to work with because of the prefabricated qualities of the house. It's a 2,500 square foot lot, but with extreme setbacks on 2 sides, 3 sides actually, a 20-foot setback in the front, which cuts on the longest side almost all the entire lot off. So it's a very small footprint, about 700 square feet. The house is about 1,500 if you don't count the roof deck on top. And because of the diagonality, we were very interested in trying to create views and vistas through one layer after another through from one side to the next. So we were able to create the spatial dynamics, both through the plan, which we were bound to in many ways, and the section. And as we went up through the section changed, and we wanted that triangularity to be felt in section as much as in plan. And this is where we found our friend, the prefabricated elements, to create these panels, which then were prefabricated. This is a small wooden screen, privacy and light screen for my daughter's bedroom. Working with StructureLam at the time up in Penticton, and from a small CAD drawing reflected into this CADWorks drawing, into a machine that put out a 7-foot by 7-foot panel with these beautiful intonations of what wood wrapping around grain, wrapping around knots feels like and sounds like, and echoes its form making into the wall that holds the light back. The prefabrication became a very powerful element to create not only those more decorative or ornamental qualities of that wall, but also the sheer space and the light and the form of the rooms themselves in both plan and in section. These are single panels, 3 or 4 of them per room, and they were dropped in literally on site from a 40-foot crane out in the alley in about 20 minutes. And I fell in love with that process, and it really opened up a huge amount of opportunities in my brain to acknowledge the fact that this material was indeed something very special beyond just its wood material. It was indeed a 21st century material, and I was very keen on investigating it. I will say that investigation continues. We are working on 2 other houses, which I consider a family to the CLT house. This is the Kenmore house on the bottom, which is under construction. I think the clients are moving in maybe next week, maybe today, maybe they already were last week. And the Shoreline house, which hopefully people will be moving in at the end of the month. We're very close to pulling the COO on both of these. And I would say we have pretty happy clients on both of these. And both of them had the power of this prefabricated work, especially in the Shoreline house, which you see depicted in Matt Catro's beautiful axonometric exploded there. The geometry is not simple, it's not clear, and yet when those panels go in, they go in perfectly, exactly right, because they have been prefabricated in a shop led by the shop drawings by Megan Doring. And I think they're perfect, but Megan can tell me what it really was. So the next project after the house, and I'll go through these rather quickly. I think these projects are somewhat well known. I just want to lay the groundwork of these prototype projects and what we learned. This is the Bellevue First Congregational Church. Beautiful folded model. Brooks Brainerd from our office just did this in a happy hour. Done, beautiful. A little sketch of mine on the right. We were developing light models. This is Joe Swain and Marisol Foreman in the light lab at the University of Washington. Extraordinary resource for those of you who are not aware of it. The models that went in and as an addition to this 1970s building. Beautiful light models that were made in the office, physical models that then began to model the project, the finished wall on the right. And this concept, this church really opened up to me the power of hybridity and the importance of hybridity. We don't design concrete buildings. We don't design steel buildings. We don't design mass timber buildings. We design buildings which have a hybridity of systems. And that includes steel, concrete in the foundations. It includes, in this case, steel brackets and vertical gravity systems for these 17 panels on the back. And the importance of that was really clear. We're not just building one material. And of course, that's an obvious thing to say to any practicing architect. But it did take the industry a while to recognize that. Some final pictures by very talented Lara Swimmer. We were very interested in the way light came into this building. We looked a lot at Alto, his churches, especially the Church of Three Crosses at Imatra, and that borrowed light from buried sections was a huge inspiration for us. So it became clear around 2016 when that church was opening, and we'd been living in our house for some year at that point, that we were really working with a very different sort of material, and that it was going to, like it had in Europe, quite quickly change and transform the US building market, even though it had really only been 2 or 3 years in this country where built examples had happened. And it was also clear that it needed a tremendous amount of care. And I am really touched by this quote of Zumthor, because it really expresses exactly the way we needed to go about the emergence of this material and help shape the debate. Because we all know mass timber comes from wood, and wood comes from forests, and we know our forests need help. And one of the things that became clear to me is that mass timber was a new agent. It was a new element of energy and people coming into this world of this divided, truncated environment of environmentalists versus timber, lumber guys, industry versus environment, and that architects could become a new actor and a new agent to help understand and dissect some of that argument. But it all came back to the beauty of the material, and this was really the motivation to use it. There were so many aspects to mass timber, and I'll go through these quickly, but these are just guiding lights. How do you take this construction form and make it into art? The fascination of this material where all these pieces coming together, little tiny 2x4s, 2x6s, 2x8s, making these massive stereoatomic panels that are knitted together with finger joining that you can just see as almost like a Japanese tracery in the walls. The power of the prefabrication. Here's Dave at our house. The 857 connections on that right hand. How do we harness the beauty and the power of the machine in a factory with kids running it in rural areas who have great educations and are getting really good jobs to make this model like Thor DeVoe did for me in 2014 when it arrived on my desktop one day. And it's the 857 connections that hold my house together as of today. How do we think about the hybridity, how that works with different trades, different contractors coming together on a site, different gravity and lateral forces, bringing the steel where it's needed, bringing the wood where it's needed. And how do we go back to where the panels are produced in factories like Mercer on the left and Kalishnikov on the right, and how we are opened up to the power of checking your work, the old-fashioned idea that we need to confirm that our carbon assumptions are actually lower, that we need to engage and invite experts into this room, not assume that we know everything, as we often do as architects, and to reach out to other people, experts in the community who understand life cycle analysis and can do the studies and show us the way. So this is a small work that we did with the University of Washington in my 2013 studio with Kate Simonin when she was just starting, before she got to be the Carbon Leadership Forum guru and god. And the importance of checking your work, being honest and open, and being careful about some of those carbon assumptions that we tend to throw around with big numbers, but can they be backed up with careful, thoughtful, collaborative science? And then, of course, measurement. This is a drawing done by some of the students in my University of Washington's 2013 studio about, this is so cool. We got these shop drawings. We've got this prefabricated model. We've got a CADWorks model. We can actually count the amount of board feet that's coming from this house. We can actually count the numbers of trees that they come from and the number of acres that they are grown in. And that led us to this all-important notion of sourcing, which is a lot of what I alluded to just a few minutes ago, but the importance of understanding your bioregion, the place that you come from, the place that the trees come from, the wood comes from, the origins of the place, and how the origins of that place can help promote this material in a healthy, sustainable, long-lasting, and durable way so that we have healthy forests for the next 7 generations. So I'm going to transition here to the forest notions. The forest has become a very, very important part of our practice, both directly and indirectly. And I bring this quote up by the Epic of Gilgamesh. I'd like to think that we're all guardians of the future, that everybody in this room is, but I'd like to think that atelierjones is certainly a guardian. We've taken multiple field trips as a company. This is Eleanor with our structural engineer, Adam Jongaward, all around the Cascadia biome and elsewhere, to really understand how the forest and lumber industries work, what kind of extractive qualities they use in the forest to bring the lumber out, and what kind of healthy strategies they use to bring the lumber out. It's an amazing in-depth curiosity that has fueled our firm for decades. But it goes back to understanding and breaking down this iconic, mythic quality of what a forest is. On the left here, we see the forest that's a forest of our dreams, it's a forest of our fairy tales, and it's a forest of our nightmares, too. This is the Mount Baker Snoqualmie Forest National Park, a beautiful place that should never be disturbed by logging and won't be ever again. Thanks to the people that saved it in this country, the regulations that preserve it today. But you can also see what a healthy forest it is. And in the middle slide is a forest that is in the middle of a state park on an island in the San Juans, also what should be a mythic place. But this particular plot of land was logged 3 times in the 20th century. And over those 3 times, my grandfather bought it in 1960 after the 3rd time it had been logged, and it was more or less clear-cut. He came along and he planted that one tree you can kind of see in the middle there, leaning a little bit to the right. He planted 800 or so of those Douglas firs, and some of them lived, but a whole bunch of other hemlocks grew up. And this is not a healthy forest. And when I came to the property of my grandfather and encountered this, it was horrifying. And I could immediately understand this is not my family's property, but how a forest like this in Cle Elum on the right-hand side could happen because of all of these hemlock, these standing, almost dead hemlock. And the condition of our forests today in the Northwest and all up and down the West Coast lands somewhere in between these 2 extremes. And we need to confront this fact honestly, with openness, with depth, and with a lot of energy, and not see it through stereotypical eyes of forest or logging is bad. Forest logging is bad because you're taking down what's on the left. You might be taking down what's in the middle. And to be really thoughtful about that. So on this piece of 140 acres on the top of Mount Constitution, Marco and I and my family and a lot of friends have really begun a very thoughtful, very labor-intensive, labor of love work to begin to thin these trees on my grandfather's property, take them out, and preserve the Douglas firs, which you can see here in the corner, and preserve those that have more light coming down to the land. It's been an extraordinary work here, and this young man who's shown here, whose mother is in the audience, with a big grin on her face right now, has been a huge talismanic force for our family and friends, and also my office in the middle, Matt Castro, again, chainsaw work. We have trees up there. We bring in local labor, local partners like Retardi in the middle, and we've had generally a great time. If you all want to come up, I might put you to work, but get some fresh oysters on the beach. It's been an amazing thing, and from that, we've begun to create spaces like you see this on the left, which did not exist before. And the light comes down, it sparks the green, and it makes those larger trees grow healthier. And it's been an amazing immersion and really a kind of teacher of how forests need to be healthy and how we can help make those forests healthy, which is a heck of a lot of fun in between them all. So as part of the project to work with the land, we built a little constitution shed in a few years, a shed that had been a water tank off the mountain. And it was one of these wonderful retreat projects that houses a space for these forest workers, forest managers, friends and relatives, and even 80 or 85-year-old mothers who come to visit to have a rest. We ended up replacing a lot of the rotten boards from the shed that was holding the water tank, and working with the existing wood on the mountain to help carve it up and to replace many of these rotten boards with local labor. Rolf Erickson is an amazing partner in all this, and there you can see him standing down there holding that crane in the water tank, and he was kind of a genius working that crane up in the middle of January. I think it was 2021 that we were putting this project together. A tiny little project with a beautiful outdoor space. As I said, we hold our trees. Reflects that light of the wood, reflects the light of the forest, and houses a small retreat to rest after you've been taking down a bunch of hemlock trees. But this is a small project, and this is not a large project, because the question of scale became really immediately obvious. I love this quote by Joni Mitchell. We all grew up with it. But what we did for Heartwood in this project was that we actually put up homes on top of a parking lot, which was a really twist on that. Now, to do that, it became really obvious from those carbon studies that we had worked with that you really needed to go up to make a big difference in the question of the carbon. That this wasn't just a matter of substituting mass timber for some single-family homes. And so there was this period of time where it was 16, the church was finished, a house was finished, and AI National, because of these two projects that had gotten relatively well known, they called me to join this code committee. The code committee changed the codes to allow mass timber to go up and up and up. And there were a lot of great people in Seattle that were applying for this committee avidly. That would have been fantastic to be on this code committee. And when the AI National said, Susan, we want you to apply for this, I said, no, I don't need to. We've got such good people in Seattle, Hunter, Joe Mayer, all these people applying, and they'll be great. And they know the codes. I am not a code architect. I'm not one of those people that designs by the code. I respect the code. I like the code. Of course, I need the code. But I'm not a designer that holds the code in my head and makes it all happen. No, we want you to join the committee. Thank you very much. No. They called again about 2 hours later. We'd like you to join the committee. Thank you very much. We've already talked. I appreciate your interest. You've got great people. Just work with them. Thank you very much. They called again. They emailed again. They called again. They emailed again. By the end of the week, I sent in the 2-page application, and by the end of that day, I had an invitation to go in July to Chicago O'Hare to sit with all these dudes, watching the eclipse and all our dudes. To go and do research and policy development for the ICC, International Code Council, to change the building codes for the US, for the International Code Council, to change the IBC, to change the IFC, and sit at committees like this one for weeks at a time over a 2.5-year period, all pro bono. Did get my plane tickets paid for by the AIE, that was about it, and my hotels. And if you look at these people, there's one steel guy, there's one concrete guy, there's one wood guy, Sam, biting his nails right next to me, Sam Francis is my hero, and there's six fire guys, and the chair of the committee is the fire guy. And these fire guys are not just your average fire guys, they're 6'9", big chiefs from Columbus, doing all the work, just talking about having a bad day. A bad day. Shane, what's a bad day? A bad day is when your boys don't come back. This was not 5 years after, 10 years after the 9/11. What does that mean? It means your boys don't come back down that tower. You want me to build a tower out of sticks and have my boys not come back? What am I going to tell everybody? I can't build a tower out of wood, Susan. He brought tears to us, as he's talking about his boys not coming back. This was the kind of emotionalism that we were dealing with on the committee, not to mention the industry from concrete and steel, who wanted nothing to do with a wood mass timber tall building. The only way to talk to Shane was to begin to talk about what he needed to convince him. What does it take to convince you that this has to happen? Well, you got to build some fire tests. Well, great, let's build a fire test. Because we don't want to do those European fire tests. There's already been 30 European fire tests out there. Why can't those other 30? Or the Canadian fire test work? It's not going to work, Susan. It's just not going to work. American fires aren't the same as European fires. What the hell are you talking about, dude? I don't get this. The whole process of the Code Committee was getting into Shane's mind and understanding what he meant by American fires being different from European fires. And it took us all a long, long time. But finally, $1 million later, test panels outside of Washington, D.C., test compartments, as drawn here by Matt, 2 stories high with massive amounts of fuel load, the highest amount of fuel load ever put into a test inside a structure. Burned it down 5 different times for 4 hours each. No sprinkler interventions, no fire department interventions. Because the sprinklers always go out again, Susan, when you have a bad day, the sprinklers go out. it was a massive wordsmithing effort for, again, 2.5 years, all pro bono work. And by 2022, we'd finished 4 or 5 code revisions, and they stand in the code today. It would allow us to go 8 stories up to 4C, type 4B up to 12, type 4A, with different amounts of coverage in the middle of that. So this process led to a project that I'm really thrilled to talk about. I hope a lot of you know about it. It's called the Heartwood Project. It's here in Seattle, just up the street on Capitol Hill. An amazing team led by Ian Maples here in the office, here in the room, for a Heartwood 67,000 square foot multifamily workforce housing project, which is a replicable model for projects all over the country to work with these codes. It's built on a parking lot, as I mentioned. Thank you, Joni. I got to do you proud. Next to a community roots housing building called Helen V. Has 126 units, all affordable units, workforce housing between 60 and 120%. Built with a little courtyard between the Helen V and Heartwood. A really common open space, beautiful little amenities at the courtyard level. We went through the MUP process during COVID in 11 months. We got the building permit submitted in 6 months. It was an extraordinary team effort in the middle of COVID that we, as everything shut down around us, we were just scattered to our Zooms and having 12 hours of Zoom calls for that whole period of time. I think it actually was a help, at least to Ian. He liked kind of like holding up in his home, and it worked out really well. It's a simple double-loaded corridor with a lateral steel core, and almost all of the units have exposed columns and beams and ceilings. The units are, this is the smallest unit. We were testing it at 11'10" clear, about 12'2" on center by 27. It's a very high operational carbon, a good EUI. We have triple glazed windows on the exterior, some extremely efficient gas boilers before the energy code went all electrical on us. And we were very proud of the operational energy that it was able to work with, not to mention all of the embodied carbon, which was still a new and emerging concept even in 19 and 20. Built the mock-ups of this amazing joint. And this joint is probably one of the most inspiring parts of the project to me because it has no steel in it. Those little pieces of gray are just fire intumescent tape up there. And the mock-up that was built at Timber Lab as an incredible partner to help realize this project all over the country was a really powerful way to convince both the authorities having jurisdiction here in Seattle that we had interpreted the same codes I helped write to build this project. Lots of BIM coordination, again, led by Ian, thanks to their incredible Revit work. Tremendous coordination so that the panels arrive on site with the holes drilled in the right place. Panels are going on the site, but led by Timber Lab in a beautiful and clear way. The mechanicals are going, plumbing stacks are going up and down on this very tight site on Capitol Hill. It was finished in 2023. The building is now 95% occupied. It's under management by Great Expectations, an amazing management company firm started by Ben Moritz. And really grateful to Community Roots Housing, our owner, who worked with Skip Stone, AP Hurd, who some of you may know, to develop this project. There were a lot of risks taken and a lot of power that happened between AP and William Silva, the director of construction for Swinnerton, to bring this project into fruition. The units are simple, they're small, 400 square feet average, there's 13 one-beds, but they also have this glorious view, especially on the upper floors, looking over the city of Seattle, over to Mount Rainier. The sun is streaming in from the south and the west. And there's lots of wood on the inside. Ian looking pensively over the city. So this model is something that we are really excited about beginning to work in other cities. This is a model that we made for a local project here, just a beautiful, simple expansion of what we can do as a future here, all based on this sort of spaceship from the sky landing into our world of this beautiful no steel joint, all wood joint that can be repeated again and again and again in projects from Harlem to Manhattan to Seattle. We were really interested in taking that all wood joint, using heartwood as a piece of how this all works together by understanding the LCAs. I spoke about the importance of checking your work. In order to stand here before you and say, wooden cities are the thing, it was really important to be able to count this wood, count the steel, count the concrete, execute the LCAs. We worked with some incredible teams at the University of Washington in the College of the Environment with the School of Environmental Forest Scientists, who are professional LCA scientists, and really begin to look at the work of heartwood, how much it would take to build a concrete equivalent, that gray bar on that side. We built second Revit models, equivalent Revit models of the exact same building using a commercially viable concrete structure designed by structural engineers who knew what an efficient concrete building was. Calculated the carbon of that superstructure, that was the 100%. Calculated the carbon of the wood without the embodied carbon, which is the green line, but just the actual carbon it took to build the building, a good 38% less. Cool, we felt really good about that. That's actually a real number that can begin, it's not going to solve climate change, but it is going to make a mark on it. And then when you count the stored carbon, which goes all the way down to that green line, pops it back up from the top of the blue line, you get a net negative building for the carbon at -3%, which we were really proud of to be able to talk through freely from. But it really does depend on what happens at the end of life, and those geeks that are out there that are life cycle analysts, you really do begin to see the difference between if all that carbon is released back into landfill uncapped, what happens? And does that carbon get released back into the atmosphere? So we went through a whole series, again, with work with the doctoral student, Christina Jarvin, to understand what happens with the second life of that building, the second life after that, the third life in OSB and particle board, and then what happens in landfills today. It's actually not just emitted into the air, it is capped. 88% of it is stored, according to research that's beyond my pay grade, and only 12% of that is emitted in total. So out of all of that, that's where we ended up with those numbers of the -3%, and it was really gratifying to see. These are studies that we did in Silicon Valley. This is a building that is still on our boards as of just last week, is in fact in Harlem. And we really hope to bring wooden cities to the US and really begin to transform the bio-based materials into our building as usual construction. It's been a really exciting journey. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit and talk about another issue, grave issue with our forests that everybody's very familiar with, more familiar with than we were when we first were confronted with it at the Dixie Fire in 2021. This is a picture of the Sierra Nevada mountains. And the power of these fires literally blowing through millions of acres in the Sierra Nevadas has been devastating to those communities, to our air pollution, to the amount of carbon that's being emitted from these forests, and how do we have a role in that when we are advocating the health of our forests and health of our cities. It's a difficult question when you're confronted with apocalyptic images like this one, when you see aerial maps of a small, sweet, rural, remote town called Greenville, California. It has about 2,500 residents, and this is what it looked like on August 3rd, 2021, and this is what it looked like on August 5th, 2021. And the impact of those fires when they swept through in an instant, in 8 hours. Luckily, there were no people. There was some advance warning that the fire might do that. People were left. There were no lives lost in this forest fire, but the entire town was wiped out. We were treated to a lecture by Kenga Kuma last week at the Mass Timber Conference, and his comment about wood as community just ran resonant in my head as I thought back to these early meetings that we engaged with at the invitation of the Sierra Institute for Community Environment, in these big wooden sheds that had been put up in part to shelter people from the fires in Greenville, California, where this is our client, Jonathan Kuzel. He's bringing together people for a sawmill ribbon cutting because all of the wood here is rapidly decaying as it was happening there. And he was able to then begin to start harvesting it, to mill it, to potentially provide solutions for people to live again. So after some input from the community, a project that Megan led with our office, we realized that we had some really powerful tools at our disposal, in part because of all these fire tests that we had done. We're working with a 4-inch material that has layers and layers, and it's a structural material, and in some cases we're working with a 6-inch material as a roof material or as a floor material, 3-ply and 5-ply. And we saw how that fire doesn't burn that stuff, and it doesn't burn through those 3 layers, it just burns one lamination. And while I can't ever recommend that I would ever be in these houses, to build back a home that follows all of the wildland urban interface design, the WUI codes, which are part of the building codes all around this country, especially in California, but because new construction doesn't often get built with them, we're challenged because the existing infrastructure is far less fire resistant, but we can, with some thoughtful, careful work and design, begin to build back houses that have a strength and a coordination to it. So with that, we started with the house 1, 2, and 3, and these are small little houses with beautiful wet cores in the center, some very simple open mass timber design on the interior, really beginning to use the power of the material where it needed to be used, concrete foundations. We had a little wet core in the middle, a mechanical, electrical kitchen and bath with mass timber on the exterior. And then, yes, we did use plate steel and also a good 6.5 inches of rock wool to protect from that WUI barrier as well. These modules were actually built, this is our office up in Method Homes, up in Ferndale, and they were shipped down on that truck, which is going to go underneath that flatbed truck, underneath the building, the pictures on the right, down to the Sierra Nevadas. They were delivered to the site, put on the concrete foundations with a big crane, and stood there awkwardly, beautifully, sweetly in the desert. For a couple of days until the mass timber came in just about a week later, shrouded those houses, and moved forward into the final build. This is house 1, the loft house, overlooking in the Greenville area. This is our friend Jordana walking through the house. Again, these are Lara Swimmer pictures. Lots of exposed wood, lots of exposed interior structure, and then the exterior, all the milled steel from the exterior. The wet core in the middle. And some of the images here. We're still doing work down in the area. This is a project in Blairston. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on it, but it's been really fun to engage with these same principles in the projects that you see here, some small houses, some small lanterns, and a marketplace. And we're also working very closely with the Sierra Institute to help institute a mosaic company, which would be then bringing down the Ponderosa pine from the mountains, which is still in good shape. So I'm going to end on this project called the Roundhouse, and it reflects also a really beautiful moment that we had with the Mayadu in Greenville, California, after the 3 houses had been built. We were asked to come to the table one night in January of 23 and talk to the Mayadu elders about what their idea for the house is. This small sketch down here at the bottom by our client, Mary Joseph, reflects the historic roundhouses of the Mayadu. This one above was actually built by one of our clients, Harvey, and he also was the one to explain this diagram on the right, where, how did you create this round house form? We asked him. He said, oh, it was easy. You just pull it back, you hold hands, you gather everybody into a circle. The circle moves out, creates this broad circle of, in this case, 36 feet, which happened to fit our site perfectly. And that becomes the circle, the diameter of the roundhouse. And then we were able to use Vaughan panels, which just happened to be kind of this modular man, 4x10 panel size, and to create the circle as a segmented circle around. The plan is working off of many, many, many traditional forms. This is the Moortown Rancheria home. Had a small gathering for their tribal events, for their children after school. The school is right next door. And a series of small offices that really gathered, as well as the all-important kitchen for Mary to make what she called their Indian tacos. And Charlene told us all about how to make those Indian tacos, and they were really, really good. Section is lightly inclined towards the summer solstice sun that comes in at 1:05 in the afternoon, much to Matt Catchell's relief, as it actually did come right through that oculus. And it's a beautiful ancient typology. We're using mass timber was in this case a really beautiful and perfect way to begin to evoke the form of those circular areas because of the way that the circles were softly created to dissolve those facets, to create a smaller space within, shrouded again by mild steel, within the desert, within the landscape. And this is a picture of the visit at the solstice last in 2024, drawing and etching the shape of the light where it should be. We were invited to present this project for the Venice Biennale last year as part of the porch that exhibited the project in the U.S. pavilion and help represent the U.S. as one of 54 firms. Built a beautiful model with a lot of help from our office, of course, but also Jack Kearney, who helped us with the black and steel, and a longtime friend from Company K. And the model was exhibited for 9 months last year in Venice. So with that, thank you very much. And I'd love to have any questions, and the books are going to be over there. Thank you.